The story begins in a prison. Our protagonist, Peter, was talking to his imprisoned father, Jack. Peter tells his father that he's an adult now and has every right to know the truth. He wanted to clear his father's name for what happened 8 years ago. It turns out that in the past, City X, a very important location in this story, was attacked by powerful monsters. There were many victims, making it the greatest tragedy in China's history. Peter's father, Jack, was the only one who escaped the catastrophe. The media reported that, according to investigations, Jack survived not by fighting, but by running away. In this country, that was considered an act of treason. But because Jack was a former hero, his sentence was to remain on trial for 10 more years until clearer evidence could be found. However, for a young child like Peter, being the son of a traitor only brought trouble and misfortune. School, work, even donating blood was impossible if you were the child of a national criminal. Peter was only here because he knew his father better than anyone. He wants to save him from this injustice. Jack tells him there isn't much to talk about. His judgment was already decided, along with his fate. He wanted Peter to leave the city, change his identity, and start a new life. He said he only wants a good future for his son. Even so, Peter wouldn't accept it and had no intention of letting his father rot in prison. As he left the visiting room, the guard called out to him. He told him that from now on the fee had tripled, since Peter had to pay to see his father. Therefore, his next visits would cost over $1,000. That's what the higher-ups decided. In fact, according to the guard, they were being very generous by even allowing visits to a traitor. But Peter thinks about how quickly people forget everything his father did for the country. Later on, the boy thinks about how the $450 fee from today already pushed him to the limit. Tripling that is almost impossible on his current salary. He was a member of the Starfall Warrior Reserve. Simply put, he earned minimum wage among the weakest warriors. It's explained that a normal person has at least 10 points in each skill, and according to his watch, Peter's skill points weren't very high. Peter suspects his father is hiding things from him, and with the fee increase, it'll be harder to visit him. So, Peter goes straight to this man, whom we'll call Jamie. He explains an E-rank mission to Peter, something easy for a typical warrior, but too much for him. Jaime mentions that Peter has only done F-rank missions, and it's a miracle he's even still alive. Peter tells him he has no other choice, so Jamie, not very happy about it, tells Peter he has a spot on an E-rank mission. Although it pays well, he knows Peter doesn't have the strength to fight even a single monster of that category. Peter looks at the guide and sees the pay, $3,000. He was very grateful to Jamie, who by the way was an old friend of Peter's father. He's been the one looking after Peter these last few years, so he's like an uncle to him. Now, I'll explain the power levels. Pay close attention because if you lose focus, you'll get lost. Everyone is a Starfall warrior, that's what they're all called. The weakest, like Peter, are in the Starfall Reserve, meaning they aren't even full warriors yet. The ranks go from lowest to highest, novice, intermediate, and advanced Starfall warriors, followed by novice, intermediate, and general Starfall warlords. There are also ranks for weapons, missions, and artifacts. Monsters have a similar category system. In a basic one-on-one fight without mutations, weapons, or experience, the ranks match up like this. Novice warriors can handle F-rank monsters, intermediate can handle E-rank, and advanced can handle D-rank. Novice warlords take on C-rank, intermediate warlords take on B-rank, and advanced warlords take on A-rank. But keep in mind, a monster usually has the advantage over a warrior of the same rank. Plus, monsters can have variations like mutations or being a boss. A common D-rank monster is nothing like a mutated one, let alone a D-rank king monster. Just like monsters, warriors can also have variations within their own rank. Let's continue. Peter gets ready. He knows that for an E-rank mission, they usually send intermediate Starfall warriors or experienced novices. Those guys are very strong. This was Peter's group. This is Jinjue, and I'll keep her original name because it's easy to remember. Jinjue was the squad leader, and she was an intermediate rank Starfall warrior. Peter notices her armor and the sword she carries. Only high-caliber warriors use that kind of equipment. It's explained that after killing hundreds of monsters, you might obtain a core. Starfall equipment is built using these monster cores, which can even boost the user's stats. An intermediate warrior stats average around 40 points. By the way, the 4 attributes are mind, physique, strength, and agility. Those are the 4 stats for every warrior. They can also gain additional skills from their weapons. Jinju was the same age as Peter, and he notes that intermediate Starfall warriors under 20 are called prodigies. Peter stops analyzing her and introduces himself, but this guy interrupts, surprised that the cannon fodder is someone so young. Peter is also surprised. What does he mean by cannon fodder? Now, the guy was hurting him, and Jinjue's uncle tells Judito, which is what we'll call him, to stop bullying the weak kid, saying it was embarrassing. Peter could already feel the bad intentions of these people. Even though they put him to the test, he responds impressively, showing off his reflexes. Everyone thinks he's actually fit for the mission, though it really took a lot out of him to pass that test. Novice Starfall warriors are much stronger than normal people. In fact, every single skill point makes a noticeable difference in a fight. Jinju said Jaime wasn't wrong to send him, and now the uncle, whom I'll call Judas, tells Peter that it's against the rules to bring someone so weak on an E-rank mission, so he has to sign this contract. Peter does the math. Good warriors, good equipment, and even a good payout for the mission. Just for today, he'd let the money lead the way, especially since he needs it. Everyone checks their gear, and the mission begins. Now, the dungeons in this world are explained. In this story, dungeons aren't from other dimensions, and you don't even need a portal. When the monsters first attacked the planet, they didn't defeat humanity, but they did manage to take over various locations across the Earth. This was all that remained of City X, now turned into an E-rank dungeon. Peter was patrolling the area when he ran into a wave of monsters called Gar Lizards, E-rank monsters. The boy aims his bow at them to prepare his move, firing at them directly, right in the eye. However, the arrow simply bounced off as if it were nothing, immediately alerting all the monsters to Peter's presence. Naturally, the protagonist starts running, but the monsters are faster than the data he read suggested. As he runs, he realizes the alligator gars have incredibly tough scales, which he can't penetrate with his current strength and weapons, along with sharp teeth that can bite through metal, webbed claws, and absorption abilities. If he didn't know these creatures in such detail, he wouldn't stand a chance in a chase, so he remembers that every monster in the world has a weak point, and the protagonist manages to take cover to surprise the monster and attack, using his weapon to fire arrows at the lizards' tongue, which weren't anything special. So even if they pierce, you simply can't hurt these monsters with normal weapons. The creature keeps coming, but thanks to his agility, Peter manages to dodge the attacks, then decides to stick to the plan and lead the monsters into the trap. The entire hunting team was waiting for him right there. This was the plan, a simple ambush. Judas shouts for everyone to get ready for the ambush, and the battle begins. It's easy for Jinjue. Her strength and rank are enough to take out monsters of this level. The fight goes well, and the boy is happy to see that the group is strong and his job has been completed perfectly. So, in just a few seconds, Jinjue finishes off the alligator gars. However, in an instant, one monster tries to attack with its last bit of strength, heading straight for the boy, and this guy, Judas's son, Judito. Seeing this, the coward pushes Peter so he'll get bitten, but the protagonist uses his agility and fires at the beast. Then Jinjue appears and delivers the final blow. Suddenly, on the ground, the boy sees a system notification that it's being activated. Peter thinks it's a hallucination, but the system says the activation is because he killed a monster. Since the guy who pushed him was Jinjue's uncle's son, nothing happens to him, and all that's left is to clean up the mess. Night was falling, and the girl was attentive to the protagonist, giving him food rations to keep him going. She also praises him, saying that being a scout with his power level is admirable. Judito tells the boy he was good cannon fodder and hadn't disappointed him. However, the protagonist isn't stupid and knows exactly what Judito's intentions were. Midnight arrived. The boy was guarding the area in case monsters showed up. Since that's his job, and he tells Jinjue she doesn't need to be there. But the huntress only follows the contract. Two people must keep watch, and she won't leave him alone because the contract doesn't allow it. At this point, Peter mentions they are in City Z. Jinjue and her group were from City J, so the protagonist asks her why they came from so far away. She says it's just a stupid test from her family, and as the boy is about to tell her why he's there, something happens. Out of nowhere, the ground starts to crumble and collapses right where they are standing, sending them both falling into the void. They end up falling onto subway tracks and using glasses that allow him to see structures. The protagonist says it was a geological failure and they've had terrible luck. Jinjue asks the boy if he can see or knows where the exit is. Peter knows exactly where all the exits are, as he researched the city thoroughly before coming, so they start moving. If the path is clear, it won't take them long. Peter notices that Jinjue can see things he can't. She says an intermediate warrior's vision allows them to see clearly, even in the dark. The girl warns the protagonist that there are E-rank monsters ahead. The protagonist wonders why he can't hear them. She says neither of them could hear them, it was simply her sword warning her. That was an ability called Sword Sense, one of thousands that Starfall warriors can learn, but this one in particular was quite special. This is why there are so many variables when a warrior faces a monster. The two prepare for the fight. There are many monsters and they're approaching at full speed. Even worse, there are more than there were above. So the huntress gets serious, determined not to lose. The boy doesn't want to just stand there, but Jinjue explains that with his strength he can't do anything. So he must stay behind her if he doesn't want to die, while she uses all her strength to defeat the alligator gars. The protagonist analyzes her power and thinks that Jinjue is very close to becoming an advanced rank warrior, given how easily she's taking these things out. A piece of a head was about to fall on the protagonist. Unfortunately, he ends up getting hurt. But he manages to take care of the creature, or at least what was left of it. Peter steps back and remembers that he wasn't even at the level of a novice warrior. In an E-rank mission, it's a miracle he's even alive and without major injuries. But then, the light and sound of a system notification returned to his head, saying that by defeating the E-rank monster, the system would soon be ready. In this situation, Peter was more worried about the monsters than his hallucinations, but Jinju handled the problem. All the beasts fell before her sword, so now they had to move toward the exit. He couldn't help but be amazed by her strength. They were close, but when they arrived, the path was blocked. Peter deduces that the exit was blocked from the outside, but Jinju was starting to suspect him. He shouted at her that it was ridiculous to take it out on him, since he was practically just cannon fodder. The girl analyzes his reaction. She puts away her weapon and tells him she was only testing him, as all these accidents were far too convenient. She turns around and tells the boy that someone wants her dead, apologizing for dragging him into this mess. Peter thought about how power struggles within powerful families are very common. The strong live and the weak die. To rise in a family, you must complete hunting missions and defeat your own siblings. She asks him if there were any other, less obvious exits. So, using his spatial memory, Peter noticed something. They had just passed a narrow exit very close to the train station. It's blocked, but there are gaps they can both fit through, so they both start running toward it. The girl is thankful she was lucky enough to be trapped with someone like him. On the way, they both stop for a moment, because we have to remember that Peter is barely more than a normal human, while Jinju's strength is comparable to Gamora from Guardians of the Galaxy. She asks him why he was doing this, why someone who isn't even an advanced warrior would look for such dangerous work. The boy doesn't say anything, but he holds the necklace around his neck, which reminded him of many things. He remembered his mother. He also remembers that his father wanted to wipe out the monsters on the planet. After a while still a child, Peter lost his mother, who, according to rumors, died while trying to save people from a monster outbreak. Peter knows his father would give his life if necessary, doing the same thing his mom did until the very end. There is someone truly responsible behind the blame placed on his father. Jinju sees that Peter isn't answering, so she apologizes for asking questions that are none of her business. The boy stands up, feeling a bit more relaxed, and then they continue. This was the spot, and they were finally outside, but in an instant, they were attacked. A massive rain of poisoned arrows flew toward them. The hunter jumps over Peter, preventing him from getting hurt. The boy gets up and sees that a poisoned arrow hit the girl. For now, they have to hide under a rock. Peter pulls out the arrow and makes her comfortable. He tells her he has the cure, so it's not a big problem. Jinju managed to see exactly who shot at her. Of course, it was her uncle and practically the entire team that was with him. Peter realizes that this whole monster hunt was just a trap for her. Jinju yells at her uncle that her father had saved him and even found him a wife, saying she expected this from anyone but him. Judas responds that for money, anyone is capable of betrayal. Then he flips a switch, exploding the entire hill, leaving the two with no choice but to retreat back into the cave. To make matters worse, many more monsters were approaching, and now it seemed like they had no chance of survival. They retreated as best they could, but this place wasn't safe at all, and the scent of the poison was starting to attract the lizard. Jinju tells Peter that this was no coincidence. They accepted him for the job not because of his skills, but because he was his father's son. In short, when they both die, they will pin all the blame on him. Peter thinks he can't let that happen. If she dies, he'll be the scapegoat and his father will pay the price. Now, more than ever, they both need to get out of here alive. A lizard attacked, but the hunter held it back, saying she could still fight. So the boy uses all his knowledge to quickly find another way out. He found it. There was a place nearby to escape, so they both start running. She fought while Peter guided her. He still felt useless, because even though she was injured, she was still the muscle of the team. They reach the spot quickly. He feels a draft, but it wouldn't be that simple. A huge pack of lizard monsters was approaching. Jinju tells Peter she'll handle the monsters while he secures the exit, to make sure these creatures don't follow them, so she starts doing her part. Peter runs toward the exit and in just a few minutes manages to build a net trap. Then the girl runs and passes underneath, causing all the monsters behind them to get trapped. Since there are so many of them, they fall easily and cause the small cave to collapse. Outside at last, the two had managed to escape without any monsters chasing them. While she was thanking him, her sword warned of danger. Many, or even more monsters had invaded the surface because of the explosion Judas caused. Even worse, the hunter was losing consciousness due to the poison and tells the boy to run before he gets caught. Peter says running is pointless here. Takes the sword and the hunter, while thinking that he has never faced a B-rank monster alone. Even if he dies here, he'll take some of these lizards to the grave with him. One jumps at him, and even though Peter decapitates it, the creature's head shoots out its tongue and pierces his heart. Peter thinks of his father and apologizes for not being able to clear his name, but just before dying, that system returns to his head. The system activated because the boy eliminated 3 E-rank monsters. The new god of war was about to be born. Peter's body regenerates as an emergency protocol. Additionally, his stats skyrocket to the limit, causing him to wake up without really understanding what happened. He didn't even have a scratch where he was pierced, but he notices all the lizard monsters were going for the girl, so he gets up and all the creatures attack him immediately. Peter dodges them without much trouble. He's very surprised, and now he can even sense a great power emanating from Jinju's sword. The weight was perfect. Peter thinks he can use it to its full potential without any trouble. The creatures wouldn't stay still and continued their attack. Peter dodges them with a jump, catches them by their tongues with a normal weapon, and pulls them with his own strength directly toward him, delivering the final blow. The boy says he's now close to the level of a top-tier rookie warrior. Combined with the sword, fighting these things wouldn't be very hard now. In fact, with so many monsters around, Peter was eager to see what he was capable of now. He charges head-on against all the beasts. Even if he gets bitten, things are different with his new physical level. He's truly stopped being weak, the one who used to hide. Now he can carve his own path through the monsters. In a very short time, the boy eliminated a huge number of creatures. The The system showed him all the points he earned for killing them, and while this was incredible, first he must figure out what to do with the hunter. The boy returned to the cave because of the explosion. As I mentioned, many lizard monsters were now on the surface, so it was actually safer down here. The priority is to stop Jinju's poison, but he'd have to make sacrifices for that. Now Peter explains that there was lizard bait in Jinju's gear that spilled. That was also why they were found so quickly by those creatures, so he must block the scent so they don't find her again. However, the only thing he had was this stinky fox liquid, something he uses constantly because monsters generally dislike the foul smell. Our protagonist says he's safe here for now, but there could be many more monsters up above, or even worse, another ambush from Judas. He needs to think carefully about how to get out, but first he has to understand the God of War system. So the boy starts checking his status, stats, and points, but I'll only tell you the relevant parts. He learns how to distribute his stat points. For every monster he killed, he received a certain number of points. After increasing his strength, the boy practiced with his sword and was surprised. He truly felt more powerful, so he distributed the rest of his points and wanted to test himself in combat. He sets a trap for a lizard monster and in a quick ambush, takes it down with relative ease. He was fascinated by his own strength and speed. The system says that for killing an E-rank monster, he currently gets 3 points per lizard. After doing the math, he couldn't believe that killing just 50 would give him enough points to distribute and reach the strength of an advanced Starfall warrior. This would allow him to increase his power much faster. After the warrior level comes the general level. Peter thinks that if he can become a warlord, no one will be able to stop him from clearing his father's name. Later, the boy was walking along the train tracks. He explains that the skins of these creatures sell quite well, so by taking as much as he can, he could earn about $5,000. However, he couldn't take it all, as it's harder than it looks. The boy scrapes his sword against the wall to alert the creatures. Within seconds, the lizard monsters arrived, but even though several tried to attack, the boy used his speed and strength to turn them to dust. He had already taken down nearly 20 lizards and was now an intermediate level warrior. Because of this, he now only receives 1 skill point for each creature he kills. Before, he got 3 points for killing monsters that were physically stronger than him. He might still need more to become an advanced warrior, but Peter knows this strength is more than enough to save himself. Ya Yin Yu. The boy kept walking and found something extraordinary, a mutated monster. This is the result of a fusion between 2 lizards. Their stats all increase, making them extremely dangerous. As far as I remember, a mutated monster is like when twins are born. It's not like 2 adults decide to fuse. No, they are born fused together. This little guy was a cannibal, devouring everything nearby just to survive while trapped here. The protagonist notes that this creature has the power of an advanced warrior, which would be a major problem. So for now, he had to retreat. He left with Jinju, who was starting to lose the scent that attracted the lizardfish. But she was injured, and he knew he needed her help to defeat that monster. As long as they couldn't get past the mutated creature, they couldn't leave. Finding another exit would likely lead them straight to the traders. Jinju woke up at a bad time, and after listening to him, she thought Peter was just good at hiding his strength. He played along since he couldn't tell her about the God of War system yet, at least until he understood it himself. He mentioned he was Jack's son, so she immediately knew who that was. She figured his strength made sense given his father's reputation, but having such a famous father meant many enemies, so staying weak helped him go unnoticed. She apologized again for dragging him into all this trouble, but he asked for her help with the mutant as they had to leave before anything happened to his father. So, she decided to go check on the monster, which was currently resting. Jinju confirmed that this was a massive problem. She explained everything about the creature, basically saying it was insanely overpowered. It couldn't be easily wounded, and each head served a specific purpose in combat. Jinju told Peter the only way to win with their weapons was by using her star sword. Only by unleashing its full power could it pierce the creature's scales. Later, she gave him a demonstration of its power. Using several lizardfish skins stacked together, she used her sword mastery to summon her power, and without even trying, she sliced through the skins like they were silk. Most advanced weapons use monster cores, so Jinju explained that resonance was essential to unleash its full power. He had to resonate with the weapon, he had to be fast and precise. She added that every time a core resonates, the weapon takes damage and wears down faster. Plus, she was too injured to use the sword at its full potential. Peter had to learn it within 3 days. The protagonist then began practicing with the sword. He killed monsters non-stop, refusing to give up. Jinju knew that mastering it in 3 days was technically impossible. A talented person would take 6 months of practice just killing dragons, and most people wouldn't achieve resonance in their entire lives. Still, she had faith in him. Since he was already an intermediate warrior at 19, she saw him as an incomparable genius with a real chance. After finishing off a group of monsters, Peter realized he still couldn't feel the ability. Jinju worried that failing to return in 3 days would be a disaster. There was a ceremony coming up, and if she wasn't there, Judas would take control of the family. Worse yet, Peter's father would be executed because his son had supposedly killed the family's prodigy. She felt bad, but he was their only hope to save them both. Meanwhile, luck was on Peter's side. The system gave him a terrifying advantage. He could learn skills using the points he earned from killing dragons. There were certain requirements, but the system offered him the chance to learn resonance right then. Of course, he agreed to trade his points for the sword skill, and instantly, his body synchronized with the weapon. Now, it had a supernatural edge. Jinju was stunned. She had no idea what happened and assumed he had mastered it on his own. To her, it was amazing but also a bit concerning, as Peter used so much energy during the resonance that he collapsed. A while later, we see the mutant resting. It was the perfect time to start the hunt. With a quick movement, Peter began the fight. The mutant noticed and fired sound waves along with its dangerous tongue. However, the boy's agility was impressive. He thought that cutting off a head would cut the monster's power in half, but the mutant was incredibly fast and landed a heavy blow on him. Peter realized he had been careless. He never imagined the tail would be so fast and strong. Even though it hurt and he was badly battered, he didn't plan on giving up. The monster kept attacking with its tongue, and while he managed to dodge, it also attacked with its tail. Despite his efforts, he wasn't able to avoid the mutant's tongue a second time. The powerful hit left him badly injured, and he had no choice but to hide. Peter was hurt, and it was absurd how much a mutant could improve. He really thought he could win after his training, but things were going poorly. Jinju yelled for him to retreat. He was hurt, and if he got caught, there would be no escape. The boy did what he does best. He analyzed the monster's strengths and weaknesses. He figured that to kill this thing, he needed to master E-rank combat skills, but even without them, he couldn't retreat. Time was already running out. If he gives up, he'll be framed for the hunter's death, and his father will pay with his life. He recalls a childhood memory of his mother's death, and the fact that her body was never found. So even if it seems impossible, his mother might still be alive. Peter can't afford to die here. The mutant continues its attack, but the boy is ready, successfully dodging the powerful monster's blows. He shouted that he would get out of here and clear his father's name, even if it was the last thing he did. The system recognized that the protagonist was fighting for his life, so it activated a skill called Perception. This was a novice rank skill that allowed him to detect anything within a 10-meter radius. The protagonist became aware of everything happening around him, even behind his back. He activated his resonance and tore the mutant to pieces. Finally, the beast was destroyed. Jinju couldn't believe it, and the protagonist told her they could keep moving forward. Additionally, the system notified him that for defeating this creature, he earned 3 points as a reward, along with the monster's core. The monster's core broke off, and now he could take it with him. The exit led straight to the surface, and the boy carried the hunter at full speed. Along the way, we can see a bit of chemistry between the two, but they were suddenly intercepted. They were met with a rain of arrows that the protagonist quickly dodged. It was none other than Judas's son, who said he brought more people this time to deal with his cousin. The protagonist remembered this guy and was eager to take care of him. Judito said his father warned him that despite their efforts, there was still a chance they were alive, so he came to make sure. Jinju replied that once she returned home, they would all be brought to justice. Then Judito ordered his men to catch them and, if necessary, eliminate them. With his dagger and skills, the protagonist found it easy to handle these guys. So he first made sure Jinju was safe. Then, Judito couldn't believe his eyes. How could someone who wasn't even a novice warrior defeat them so easily? He thought it was thanks to the Star Sword, so he ordered them to keep firing. But with the boy's perception, tracking the arrows or bullets and destroying them in an instant was no longer a problem. With incredible speed, the protagonist took care of everyone. Now only the loudmouth rat was left. Judito didn't know what to do, so he started to run. But the boy was absurdly faster. He caught him and hurt him bit by bit to make him suffer. Even though the guy grabbed an arrow from the ground and refused to give up, the protagonist finished him off once and for all. Later, the two continued on their way. Jinju's family rescue team had arrived. The family butler was there to escort her. The girl told the protagonist that as soon as she arrived, she would have everything ready to take down the traitors in her family. Meanwhile, the butler looked with disdain at the fact that Peter had Jinju's weapon. The two said their goodbyes, and the girl shouted to the protagonist that he must come see her, as she had already given him her address. But the butler told the hunter that the son of a traitor wasn't worthy of her. Later, Judas arrived, seeing how his little aberration had been killed, and he swore that no matter what, he would make the protagonist pay for everything. Night fell, and a helicopter landed at the prison where Peter's father was being held. We'll call them Marin and Sandra. They were here for Jack. Now they were in Jack's room. The visit from these two surprised the protagonist's father, and not in a good way. The boy was also there, wanting to tell his father everything and hoping he would tell him the truth. But then he noticed something in the air. A floating prison, the most dangerous in China, where the strongest are kept and no one leaves alive. The guy can't believe it, but he knows that massive prison is only here to take Jack away. Right there on the terrace, they're already taking him. But somehow, the boy one way or another manages to make his way up there. The guards try to stop him, but Peter brushes them off, knocking them down as they approach. Though I'm not really sure what he's trying to do. He's attacked by Sandra, but thanks to his perception skill, he manages to block her strike. The protagonist tells her he just wants to say goodbye to his father, but she's strong, so all he can really do is block her attacks. The Marine tells Jack that his son moves very well and is actually good at hiding his strength, but Jack has no idea what's going on either. The protagonist keeps dodging and yells at Sandra that if she doesn't want to get hurt, she should back off. So he activates his resonance and they have a clash that causes an explosion. Neither the protagonist nor Sandra plans to back down, but unfortunately for the boy, his weapon's core ends up being destroyed. The Marine admires the boy's strength and decides to give him a minute to talk to Jack. The protagonist's father congratulates him on how strong he's become, and he starts to cry. Jack tells the boy that he never betrayed China. The evidence is locked in a restricted area of a military base in a distant city. If he wants answers, he can go there to find them. Finally, the helicopter and the aerial prison take off. The protagonist stays on the terrace, watching them take his father away. The next day, the boy is resting, and he wakes up in a very bad mood. Well, now he has to move on. He can't really remember why he woke up so early. Then he remembers Jaime. He had told him he could take what he needed to start his journey to City H, in search of the answers his father promised. So he gets ready and leaves for there immediately. When he arrives, Jaime analyzes the boy and is surprised he's become so strong. He must have simply been hiding his strength. Jaime thinks regardless he doesn't care. Everyone has things to hide. Everything the protagonist needs to reach the city is in this backpack, and his journey is relatively simple. He also gives him a novice warrior certificate to take the exam and officially become an intermediate one. But he has to wait 3 months for that. Jaime tells him that City H is heavily guarded by the army, and you don't just enter and leave easily. The boy thanks him for taking care of him all these years. His uncle says everything he's done was because Commander Jack saved him years ago, so he leaves, promising he'll come back to visit his uncle. Jaime only hopes the boy will do well and not think about coming back home, at least until he's much stronger. The protagonist says he already has his tickets, so now he'll head to the mall to fix his sword and install the mutated monster core. On the way, he gets a call from a friend, and they make plans to meet up, including the friend's girlfriend, to chat for a while. The boy finally arrives, immediately noticing that he can see everyone's real levels. He's able to see the strength of others thanks to the system. In fact, he concludes that he can only see the rank of those who are equal to or weaker than him, since he couldn't see Sandra's power. In this world, being strong also makes it easier to find a partner. And when he enters, he sees that there are many people here. The protagonist checks the prices at the mall and exchanges everything he collected from the monsters, deeply regretting that he left some raw materials behind. If he had collected everything, he would be really rich. The protagonist notices a worker. Peter knows that girl. She's his friend's girlfriend, but she's busy and has things to do, so he goes to another worker to have her take him to a blacksmith. The worker explains that only an advanced rank blacksmith can forge this type of monster core, and currently they don't have a blacksmith of that caliber, so he decides to leave. But just then, a girl appears, and so the manager ran over to tell him that a blacksmith had finally arrived who could forge the sword. Her name is Nyan. Despite being young, she already had the rank and skill to forge the weapon he wanted. At first, she didn't believe the boy was the owner of the core, because when Peter handed it over, she saw it was a very healthy, strong, and powerful core, so she didn't think someone so young could take down the monster it came from. The protagonist tells her it's his, but she still doesn't believe him. She tells him to follow her but warns she won't be responsible if his lies get him into trouble. They then head to the forging area. Here we see Nyan working on the blade's body for the core. Once it's finished and forged, it was time for the most important step. She embeds the core into the sword so they can fuse, releasing a massive amount of power. Now, the boy must suppress the monster's soul to finish the sword, which he does quite easily, simply by remembering the moment he defeated the mutant lizard. The sword was now ready for use. Nyan is shocked, as only the one who kills the beast can intimidate and suppress it. No matter how strong someone else is, the monster's spirit will always resist, but against their killer they simply shrink back in fear. So, she apologizes to Peter for not believing him, though he didn't really mind, so there was no need for an apology. The protagonist can feel the power of his new weapon, an E-rank sword. Just by holding it, he felt much stronger. Nyan tells him that if he wants her to be his personal blacksmith, he has to call her big sister. He agrees, albeit reluctantly, but in exchange, he receives a VIP card for special discounts and to move through the mall without any issues. He feels this is perfect, as the mall has an exclusive weapon testing area and he wants to see what his new weapon can do. A little while later, we're introduced to a trainer, an advanced warrior we'll call Tank. He receives a notification that the boy is about to fight, and since he's a VIP, Tank decides to help him test the weapon himself. The protagonist was waiting and Tank arrives immediately. He introduces himself and mentions his rank, explaining he's there to help with the test. Standing before Tank, Peter realizes his power is equal to or even greater than Sandra's. However, he's confident because of his new weapon and wants to see what it's capable of. The fight begins, and the boy attacks with incredible speed. Tank thinks he's very fast for his age, but he quickly pulls out his weapon, a giant axe, to defend himself. The boy is impressed by his tremendous strength, but he uses his perception to look for openings in Tank's defense. However, in an instant, the big guy switches to attack mode and knocks the protagonist back with a single blow. Peter thinks that if it weren't for his new sword, he might not have been able to get back up after such a hit. Tank tells him he's too naive and that if he really wants to win, he needs to go all out. The protagonist prepares his move, having already visualized exactly what his limit was. The axe and sword clash head-on with great force, and although Tank gets slightly injured, he releases his power to push the boy back. It was actually a combat skill, and Tank gets annoyed with himself, as he could have seriously hurt the boy. The battle ends immediately. The big guy apologizes, and the protagonist says it's fine, since he also got carried away. Tank has to leave, but before he goes, he tells the boy he needs to practice hard to master the sword. He hasn't fully mastered it yet, so there's plenty of room for improvement. After he leaves, Nyan tells him he needs to name the sword to register it at the mall. For now, he decides to call it Bonebreaker. Later, the boy is at the mall's restaurant, waiting for his friend to arrive, when suddenly, he started hearing shouting and insults coming from outside. It was those thieves, and they were messing with his friends. They were accusing the protagonist's girlfriend of stealing their monster core, but I'll keep it brief since this doesn't really go anywhere. The thieves started getting aggressive, but our protagonist stepped in. Peter threatened them to make them leave, but it was no use. Then Tank and the security council arrived, so the guys had no choice but to get out of there. The group went to a restaurant far away from the mall. They had a nice afternoon together, and once night fell, they said their goodbyes. By the way, he didn't tell his friend anything about the God of War system, and now he was continuing his journey. He finally arrived at City H. This was the military base Jack had mentioned. He watched and analyzed everything to see how he could get in and find clues to free his father. However, he realized that trying to infiltrate would be ridiculous. He would only be risking his life with zero chance of success. Peter explains that this city was guarded by the military. He comes from an area guarded by mercenaries and the Star families. After 10 days of wandering around without making any progress, he decided to visit a friend to find more information. We'll call her Natalie. She tells him that if he hadn't found a hunting group yet, she had contacts who could recommend him. He knew he was strong enough to find a group, but he wasn't here just to hunt monsters. Suddenly, an important announcement was made at the bar for all the hunters in City H. A joint operation would be held among many hunters, like a tournament to see who the most capable people in the area were. The top 10 would have a chance to get a position at the city's central military base, which was the perfect opportunity he was waiting for. Now, they explain the phenomenon in City H and other parts of the world. On certain days of the year, meteors fall, causing monster outbreaks. So the three associations, the military, the mercenaries, and the Star families, periodically join forces to eliminate these creatures, and the best are well rewarded. In the tournament, each monster is worth a certain number of points. The stronger or rarer the monster you kill, the more points you get. The winners are the top 10 with the most points. This all takes place in the wild or forbidden zone of City H. The protagonist thought about everything I just explained and decided that becoming a top 10 hunter this year would be his goal. The next day, it was time to sign up for the joint operation. He saw a life and death contract, which was normal for a mass hunt since casualties are almost inevitable. Natalie was at the same place, and seeing Peter, she got worried that he was participating. So she asked this boy to look after him. We'll call this guy Dan. He's the son of the mercenary leader, Lear, so he's important. At first, he had no intention of helping, but Natalie promised to introduce him to a beautiful younger sister so he'd have a chance to win her over. Dan accepted because he was desperate for female attention, but it was all a trick. She didn't even have any sisters. When afternoon came, a military train departed for the mission. The protagonist and practically everyone who signed up were on board. He thought about how the monsters on the mountain were rank D, which is why the three major forces of the region gathered for this event. They were at Ghost Rain Mountain. This man was the leader of the Star families who showed up, and we'll call him Falco. Dan was the son of the mercenary leader, and we'll talk about the military leader later. Meanwhile, in a very refined place, the main leaders of the forces were gathered. On one side was the head of the military, who we'll call Connor. Dan's father was also there, the head of the mercenaries, whom we'll call Hallen, and finally, a despicable man who was one of those who turned their backs on Jack, the leader of the Star families, Falcon. He doesn't really say anything relevant. They're just three old men putting their representatives forward as the main candidates to win. The protagonist moved with great speed, thinking that this mission was like killing two birds with one stone. By killing monsters, he'd earn points, increase his strength, and reach the top 10. Then he could start investigating the base. The operation lasts 3 days. In the last tournament, the 10th place score was over 500 points, so he needs to get around 600 to have a chance at the top 10. He arrived at some ruins and wondered why it was so quiet, but the monsters immediately started coming out. These were known as rain rock spiders. He says these monsters are rank F, have venomous fangs, and live in hives. This abandoned town was a perfect nest for them, and an excellent opportunity for him to earn a massive amount of points. Using his sword and speed, the protagonist looked like a tornado, tearing through everything in his path. Peter finished them all off thanks to his strength, but he knew that spiders were very territorial. Therefore, it made no sense to keep looking for monsters in this area. However, the plan changed because he wasn't getting many points for killing such weak creatures, but he could save all these materials to sell and make a fortune. More spiders kept coming, so he took them out while focusing on polishing his technique, Willow Steps. This was a new move he just acquired, and as he fought, he realized that this movement skill was incredible. Even without much speed, the spiders couldn't even touch him. He then explains exactly where he got this new ability. It was bought and learned at the mall and was only F rank. But as I told you, skills also have ranks: beginner, partial, familiar, and perfection. So the boy would hurry to clear this spider nest and move on to hunt E-rank monsters. Not far from there, a chase was taking place. Some assassins were pursuing Dan. The boy was intermediate rank, which is why he had the ability to escape, but right now he was being cornered because he was ambushed and they wanted to take him out. Coincidentally, Dan ended up arriving at the abandoned spider village. Without paying attention, he was ambushed by these things, but he was way too relaxed and didn't even have a weapon, meaning he came to this trial unarmed. He was just about to be bitten when our protagonist appeared and wiped out all the spiders. Peter wonders how a kid ended up in such a dangerous situation, and Dan, of course, recognizes the boy Natalie asked him to look after. They both took shelter in a house in the village. Dan questions how a novice rank, meaning Peter, had cleared this village all by himself. The MC tells Dan he should stay here. The rescue team will arrive in a couple of hours, and this is the safest place. Dan tells him who he was and that he didn't want to be called Chubby, but Peter was new to this city, so he didn't know he was facing the son of a warlord. Dan knows he's being chased by strong assassins, so he needs to stay with the boy and offers him some interesting skills in exchange for being his bodyguard. The MC didn't believe Dan at first, since the boy was offering E-rank skills, things that cost millions of dollars in the mall markets, for example. So Dan tells him who he really was, and the MC remembers the surname of the mercenary president, so he starts to believe him. To make sure, Dan immediately transfers the same skill the MC already had, but at E-rank, Willow Steps. The boy sees that the system accepted the skill without any issues and immediately agreed to get Dan out of there safe and sound. The deal was done, and suddenly they were attacked. The attack was aimed straight at Dan, however, the MC manages to protect him. These were the assassins looking for the boy sent by Falcon, because Dan is very young, and for his age, he's already terrifyingly strong. So Falcon's family wants to deal with him before he becomes unstoppable. Dan tells Peter he's sorry, saying he would fight now to buy the boy time to escape. He tells the assassins he recognized them. They were from the Lee family, which is Falcon's family. The MC starts thinking, and that family name sounded familiar. Now let me tell you about Falcon's relationship with Jack. In the past, that old man was saved by Peter's father, but when he was a child in court, he saw how that same old man blamed and framed his father for something he never did. So, this was actually his business too. Destroying and taking down this Falcon guy would become one of the MC's main goals. The assassins begin their attack. The MC is ambushed from behind, but with all his strength and in a single blow, he knocks the man back. Dan was being harassed, but Peter also gets those two off him. The boy thinks about how they were intermediate warriors and had F-rank equipment, so it wouldn't be easy, but it wouldn't be impossible to take them all out. So he activates his perception and moves using Willow Steps. The first assassin tries to strike the MC head-on, but in fact all three were trying to take him down and failing. The MC couldn't make any progress against the three of them either, so he decides to pull back. Peter asks Dan if he's still able to move, so Dan acts as bait, and the boy surprises one of them, attacking with the full power of his sword. However, he manages to get shot from behind, though it doesn't affect him much. Dan tells him that taking out one is enough. He shouted at Peter to escape, but the system said the MC had 10 unassigned points, therefore he can learn the skill Dan gave him. Seeing that he must end this fight quickly, he decides to learn it, and in less than 10 seconds, the skill is already unlocked for the MC and ready to use. So, in a quick movement, the boy manages to disable one assassin, while another guy tries to take the boy down from behind, but thanks to his perception, Peter dodges and, with a quick strike, he gets rid of the last remaining assassin. Dan couldn't believe what happened. Not only did he win, but he learned a skill in seconds, which should be impossible. Peter notes that the guys were loaded with money, so Dan suggests he take first place, since the person who sent the assassins was after that top spot for the reward. Not far from there, someone was hunting monsters. It was Falco, and he wondered why he lost contact with the assassins. However, he figured that as long as Dan was injured by the trap, he wouldn't stand a chance at first place, and that was all he cared about. By the way, he is the son of Falcon. Now, Peter was carrying Dan, likely looking for a safe place. At one point, he stopped because he noticed the area was far too quiet. Right then, they were attacked by an E-rank monster. Peter takes care of this thing with ease. With this, they obtained medicinal artifacts that sold very well on the market. Now they had to keep moving. During the trip, Dan explains to Peter why it was good to take the top spots, and if possible, be the best in this tournament. There are things called artifacts that come from mysterious plants found only in this city. In fact, they were very recent, but these special elements are great for increasing power. The higher the rank of the element you consume, the more it helps you break your limits. Peter figured first place would need at least 1,000 points. That would be a lot of E-rank monsters, but Dan knows where to find them and leads the way there. Peter immediately picked up the scent of nearby monsters, iron wolves, and they were D-rank. He thinks about how these creatures can rank up 3 times faster, since monsters can evolve and ascend in rank. Plus, Peter thinks that with these beasts, he can get enough points for a high ranking. This was a special sight for mercenaries, so now he was eager to start the hunt. The plan was for Dan to hold them off while Peter hunted them down. In no time at all, they earned 134 points and decided it was best to retreat from the area. Peter and Dan were resting now. Peter said they had 1,000 points to redeem, but it wasn't enough for first place. Dan says that the Lee family, meaning Falco, likely had several groups gathering points. Although that was illegal, if they don't get caught, then 1,000 points probably won't be enough. It was already the second night of the 3-day tournament. Peter immediately senses something, like a spider sense. He felt like they were being stalked, but Dan was focused on roasting the legs of the monsters they had hunted. It smelled delicious to Peter, but suddenly, a powerful presence appeared. A D-rank wolf, but this one is a king, likely the alpha of the whole pack. Peter says that unlike the others, this one is in another league entirely. It was easily the strongest creature Peter had ever encountered. He notes that a monster like this has the power of a C rank. Rank monsters are capable of taking on a warlord. Peter realized there was no point in fighting, so all they could do was run. The monster began to chase them, and it was incredibly fast. Peter noticed that this thing was twice as fast as a normal wolf. It would probably be the end for him if it caught them. Peter dodges it using his speed skill and tries to cut it, but it's useless. He didn't even have the strength to pierce this alpha's hide. It charges at him with its horn, and with no other choice, Peter decides to level up his movement skill. That's how he managed to evade it. Peter was amazed by the creature's power. A single hit could be more than enough to kill him. Meanwhile, Dan was getting dizzy from the speed Peter was moving at. Peter wanted to keep leveling up, but the system said that once you upgrade a skill, you can't do it again for a while. So he decides to increase his agility instead, but that stat had already hit the cap for a warrior. However, even if he couldn't face it, Peter knew this was enough to at least stay away from the monster. He uses his sword again. With his new attributes, he was able to apply more force, and although he managed to pierce the skin, the wolf recovers instantly, and by just a centimeter, the protagonist avoided losing his shoulders. So he decides to run as fast as he can. Right now, fighting would mean certain death. The boy put quite a bit of distance between himself and the mountains. Dan surprised him by offering Peter a piece of meat to calm him down. They then started arguing about the big guy's constant urge to eat, but suddenly, some uninvited guests arrived. It was more guys looking for trouble. Peter wondered if Dan was cursed with bad luck. These guys wanted to rob them, but none of them were more than rookie warriors, so it was easy for the duo to get rid of them without any trouble. After turning the tables and robbing them instead, the boys moved on, now carrying even more points and a decent amount of loot. They continued forward and came across a group of people who had also been robbed, but these people looked to be in terrible shape. Suddenly, in an instant, they were attacked from behind. Although they managed to protect themselves, Dan recognized them immediately, important members of the Lee family better known as the Twin Snakes. Our protagonist tells us they are advanced warriors who were stealing points, likely to give them to Falco. In case I didn't mention it, official points are counted at the end in a safe area, so it doesn't matter how many monsters you kill. What matters is how many points you can actually bring back to be counted. Peter is attacked again, but he dodges thanks to his movement skill. They were harpooners hiding like rats. Peter knew this was really dangerous. One of the snakes attacked him, and though he defended himself, Peter could tell these guys were incredibly powerful. Against harpooners and 2 advanced warriors, he was literally risking his life. While Peter defended against one, Dan appeared behind him to cover his back. The protagonist kept taking hits from all sides, so he decided to escape before things got worse. The snakes assumed the boy was Dan's bodyguard. They admitted he was strong, but didn't think he'd last long. Peter was thinking of a way out of this mess when he remembered something important. The D-rank Wolf King could lead them to him. That monster would take care of them easily. So Peter told Dan the plan and started moving. Of course, the twin snakes weren't going to let them just walk away, so the boys had to defend themselves as they ran. Thanks to their movement skill, they had the advantage of being able to fight and flee whenever they wanted. The snakes said they needed to hurry, as this was the last night and they had to get back to Falco to deliver the points. Peter was already close, and he threw a jar at them filled with a liquid used to attract the Wolf King's attention. The guys got angry and really wanted to finish off the protagonist now. The boys finally reached the mountain area. The snakes thought this was the perfect place to corner and catch them. However, they were the ones who ended up cornered. Right in front of them, the alpha wolf appeared, and they recognized it immediately, realizing it was a trap. The wolf attacked them head-on. Although they could withstand its attacks, the harpooners were useless because their arrows were missing the mark. They couldn't even scratch the wolf, so the snakes ordered everyone to fall back. This was incredibly dangerous. Peter and Dan watched them from a distance. They were impressed the guys didn't die instantly, but Dan told Peter the wolf hadn't even broken a sweat. It would easily keep them busy for a while. The wolf attacked with all its might. It wasn't going to let them win so easily. The men wondered how this monster could be so powerful. To be fair, they were holding their own quite well, since they weren't just any random fighters. But only the snakes could truly withstand its attacks. The Wolf King began taking out all the harpooners. The men pulled out a super powerful rope, a long-range weapon perfect for catching beasts like this. So taking advantage of a distraction, the snake managed to catch the wolf, tying it up by its legs, hind legs, and slammed it against the floor. Dan says that rope significantly reduces the difficulty of catching any monster, so they used their combined attack to deal massive damage to the beast. But Peter notes that their combined technique was comparable to a D-rank attack. And Dan couldn't believe the wolf was being beaten by this pair. However, the wolf wouldn't give up and used its magic horn to pierce through the twins. Then Peter and Dan step in, taking out the few remaining enemies. The protagonist took advantage of the wolf being wounded on the ground, so he attacks with all his might. Using his penetration skill, finally, he managed to defeat the creature. The twins managed to get up, but they collapsed to say their final words. They were furious for falling into the boy's trap and not getting rid of him the moment they saw him. The protagonist thanked them for all the loot and for taking down the wolf. Finally, the two of them passed away. The wolf, despite all its wounds, got up and tried to escape. The protagonist tells Dan they have to chase it, as that monster must be worth a ton of points. This Wolf King runs toward a cave, however, the creature couldn't hold on any longer and ends up dying once and for all. The system told the boy that for defeating a Wolf King, he earned 5 points as a reward. The guys start gathering what they can. The wolf was also worth a fortune, but the most valuable thing is this horn, something so rare that it doesn't even have an official point value in the tournament, because no one has ever caught one before. But it could easily sell for 10 million on the market, plus they got the twins' super useful rope. Dan says the twins' total points were 320, so victory was almost guaranteed. Remember, the two of them have to split the points, but then the guys notice the entrance to a cave and decide to go inside, hoping to find something great. When the protagonist enters, he sees what happened. It looked like total destruction. The guys conclude it was an internal struggle. Likely, when the animals turned into monsters, they had a conflict with each other. The guys start looking around to see if they can collect more points, and they come across a massive climb. Dan tells the protagonist that since he's injured, there's no point in going up, so Peter decides to go up alone. When the protagonist gets to the top, he's surprised. He sees a mutated tree and wonders how this whole area was even possible, and suddenly, foxes and eagles appear. The protagonist hides, thinking that if they're guarding this place, it might be because there's something important hidden here. A new day arrived, and all the participants were turning in their points. Most of the hunters were waiting for their turn to have their points counted. A guy named Sam was the army's representative, and Falco was nearby, also waiting for his turn. Peter and Dan finally made it. It was now Sam's turn to count his points. Falco was annoyed because the Snake twins still hadn't shown up. Sam got 746 points, and Falco had an inferiority complex, saying he expected nothing less from his greatest rival. However, Falco was confident because he received help from several groups, which would be enough to surpass him, reaching a total of 813 points, and Falco bragged about it to Sam. However, Sam ignored him, knowing how useless Falco really was. Now it's Dan's turn. The counters are surprised because he has a lot of points at first glance, and Dan mocked Falco to his face, since he couldn't eliminate him and he wouldn't take first place either. They congratulate Dan on winning, but the boy says he can never be first while competing against his boss. Peter steps forward and presents his points. In the end, he got 810 points. But something was missing. The wolf horn puts him even higher, but as I mentioned, this horn has no set value because it's never been obtained before, so they had to call the boss, Connor, to give his verdict. Falco couldn't believe what the protagonist and Dan had achieved. He was convinced they cheated, and when he looked closely at the skins the protagonist used for points, he realized they were the skins of the twin snakes. So he got angry, thinking first place should have been his. Of course, Falco didn't stay quiet and shouted that he wanted the boy investigated. The protagonist prepared to fight. He really wanted to hurt the Lee family, and what better way than by eliminating their future head. However, before anything could happen, the warlords arrived. The 3 greatest warlords of the region were here. The protagonist could feel the power radiating from them, and of course he recognized Falcon. In fact, Falcon also recognized Peter. Connor said that fighting here was forbidden, and Falco kept shouting that he wanted the boy investigated, because it was impossible for someone like him to kill a wolf king. Connor agreed with Falco, but said he wouldn't just investigate him, he'd investigate all the participants, which wasn't good for Falcon anymore. Falcon told Connor his son was just upset about not winning, and there was no need to investigate anyone. So Connor decided to leave everything as it was, and since an alpha wolf horn had never been turned in before, he personally awarded him 500 points, congratulating the protagonist for taking down such a strong monster. The boy was honest and said he couldn't have beaten it alone because he used many tricks and could never face it head-on. Connor was direct and told the protagonist that if he joined the army, he would immediately receive the rank of colonel, but Harem intervened, saying the boy was from the mercenary zone and he didn't want to let someone as talented as Peter be stolen away. Falcon thought about Peter's father, and behind a peaceful mask, he offered his congratulations to Harem for having a new genius. Then he had to leave. Falco told his father everything he knew, and Falcon told him to shut up for being useless. Besides, now that Jack's son was here, Falcon had no intention of letting the protagonist escape alive. Now the top finishers had to go directly to claim their prizes. The boy wondered if he would finally have a chance to find the answers his father left in the military base. This was the military base? The boys were taken there in this truck. The protagonist saw all the security and thought it was a great idea not to try and sneak in, as it would have been certain death. The boys got out and entered the main hall of the base. Now they would be taken by this man to see the boss. Once gathered, Connor told them that they would receive their rewards right now. The protagonist was given a security pass, like a certificate to enter and leave the base whenever he wanted, along with a good amount of money. And now, his exclusive gift would be delivered, a core from the recent plants I mentioned before, artifacts that help improve a person's progress or potential. This was D rank, and very few people are known to have consumed them because they only appeared in the world a couple of years ago. So, doctors even watched to see how the protagonist would react. The boy swallowed it, but he didn't really feel anything. The core didn't even have a taste. It was like flavorless gelatin. The protagonist's system absorbed the core and gave Peter's stats a considerable boost. The protagonist became much more powerful in a matter of seconds, but the prizes weren't over yet. Connor offered them some high-rank skills to improve their fighting levels, and now the boys headed to another, more hidden part of the base. The protagonist looked at the rooms, and based on the numbers, he deduced where the box Jack told him about was. It was below this floor, so he had to go down one more level. The boys and Connor arrived at this location. Dan and Shan could choose from 3 combat skills owned by the army. Dan chose a divine power skill that worked for him, and Shan chose one that improved strength and swordsmanship. Now Connor told Peter he could choose any skill from everything they had right there. So after searching through all these wonderful D-rank skills, Peter finally decided to choose Flashblade, Shadow, which would help increase his skills with the sword. Connor told the protagonist that this skill was exclusive to the army, so he shouldn't teach it to anyone else outside the city. And now the boys had to leave. On the way out, the protagonist asked about a hidden place in the base, wanting to know if becoming a security consultant gave him the right to enter. Shan knew the place well and told the protagonist that it was impossible. To enter, you must request permission from the High Command. Only warlords can enter without it, and it's said they hide an absolutely brutal training camp there. Peter is happy because becoming a warlord no longer seems impossible. Sooner or later, he could continue his investigation to help his father. As night fell, Helan, in the middle of a private celebration, congratulates our protagonist for everything he achieved. He didn't actually know that Peter had saved his son. To secure the boy's trust, he gives him a check for a large sum of money. The protagonist then says his goodbyes. He was eager to learn the 8th-class skill that he picked up at the base. When the next day arrived, Helan found out everything that happened to his son and wanted to take down Falcon and his entire disgusting family for what they tried to do to Dan. Now, we're at a training camp. The protagonist was thinking about the 33 points he had left after the expedition. Remember that while he earned many points, he also spent them learning and perfecting his skills to survive. Learning this skill cost him 20 points, so he decides to activate it without a second thought. The skill did exactly the following. It increased his sword's speed and power while reducing the noise it made, and it had a chance to land a lightning strike like a critical hit. The protagonist starts practicing with the skill and is surprised because indeed he was now much more powerful and the sword felt better in his hands. All that's left is to improve his technique, and later he would start enjoying the money he earned. First, the protagonist pays a visit to Natalie and Dan. Peter brought a gift for both of them. As you remember, Dan was trying to be a smooth talker, so he dropped the act and thought about learning more from the protagonist to be better at winning over girls. Now the group was taking a walk through the city. They passed by properties that cost hundreds of millions, but they were the safest of the safe. In an instant, Peter noticed a woman. It was Sandra, but he didn't recognize her. And now, they arrived at this massive mansion. Natalie surprised the protagonist by telling him the army itself was giving him this property. Now, the boy would have a place to live. All of this was simply because he had the potential to one day become a warlord. So they went shopping. Later that same night, we find ourselves here. This was the mansion of Falcon and his nasty family. Today there was a party to celebrate the tournament. And of course, the protagonist and his friends were invited. The party was incredibly luxurious. The walls, the lights, and even the people looked like they were dripping in gold. Natalie tells Peter that if Falcon had won, this entire place would really be 10 times more elegant. Not long ago, the Lee family wasn't anything special, but they used their wealth to buy the loyalty and power they have today. Peter starts thinking about what this family did to his father to get him imprisoned. From above, Falco watched the group, and he was furious because he should have been the winner. A man we'll call Rock asks Falcon if Peter was the one who killed the Snake twins. Falco confirms it, and Rock now wanted to end the boy's life no matter what it took. Sean was talking to some guys, and they were mocking him because a weakling like Peter beat him in the competition, but they had no idea how strong the protagonist really was. Rock appears and walks straight toward the group. Dan tells Peter that this man was the one who trained and raised the Snake twins. He's very tough, and they call him the Bear of the Lee family. The man approached the protagonist and asked if he wanted to spar, suggesting a friendly match that left everyone surprised. Dan tells Peter it's a trap and that he doesn't have to accept, but Falco appears to provoke him, calling him a coward for not wanting to face the bear. The protagonist replies that accidents can happen and he didn't want to cause trouble for the Lee family. Falco says that wouldn't be a problem, as Rock is too tough to die in a simple spar, so it wasn't such a bad idea after all. Everyone headed over to the mini battlefield. The protagonist drew his sword, knowing Rock was stronger than the twins. Much stronger. The man started by attacking, and of course he had no intention of holding back. But the protagonist dodged him without much trouble. Even so, the attacks continued. Despite taking a direct hit from the protagonist, he defended himself quite well. Natalie shouts to Peter that it's ridiculous to keep risking himself for nothing, but Falco knows that if the protagonist gives up so easily, the Mercenary Association would lose its prestige, so he wouldn't quit. Dan had already realized it was all a trap. The protagonist notes that Rock was even stronger than he expected, but with his current strength, it wouldn't be too hard to finish him off. So, he attacked with all his skills activated at full power. Rock tried to shield himself, but seeing he was about to die, he screamed for the Patriarch Falcon to save him. But it was already too late. The protagonist eliminated him with a single, full-power strike. Sean couldn't believe the protagonist had mastered the combat skill he got from the military base in just 3 days, and Dan was just as stunned. Suddenly, a massive commotion broke out because someone from the Lee family had died in their own home. Then the Patriarch Falcon arrived, and without saying a word, the old man launched a direct attack at the protagonist, but someone stepped in and took the blow for Peter. They began to trade hits, and the protagonist was terrified by such incredible strength. Alan pushes Falcon back and tells him that in these kinds of fights, accidents are inevitable, and besides, Rock was the one who started it. Falcon gets angry at Alan for interfering and thinks to himself that Peter is growing too fast and must be dealt with right now. But even Boss Connor had arrived. It was now impossible for him to do anything to the boy. Peter thanks Alan for saving him, and he tells him not to be so formal, adding that his move was far beyond that of a normal warrior, and he'd soon be a war general. Sean thinks that the protagonist is on a level above even geniuses. It was a good thing someone so strong wasn't an arrogant jerk. The protagonist leaves the house, promising that as he gets stronger, he'll soon return to destroy this horrible family. Meanwhile, Falcon was talking to his son about how they lost a future war general, Rock. Falco wouldn't stop telling the Patriarch what to do, so he received a slap. The Patriarch tells him that the protagonist is a massive problem. They had a plan to become an absolute force that was almost complete, and they couldn't afford any mistakes or interference. So he orders Falco to eliminate Peter and Sandra from a distance. He was spying on them. A week passed. The protagonist continued training his swordsmanship. But he knew this wasn't enough. Peter needed to go out hunting right now to increase his stats. Just then, Natalie arrived to tell him about a mission that the mercenary president had assigned to him. Peter and Natalie go to a room together. Some hunters were already there. This was the hunting team the protagonist would join to eliminate monsters. The boy analyzes them all, but the one who catches his attention most is this guy, who we'll call Terrence. He was a rookie war general. This is the mercenaries' main hunting team, called the House of the Sword. We'll call this guy Paul, and he was an advanced level warrior. The Cap tells Peter he'd be going on a D-rank hunt. If he wasn't prepared, he would kick both of them off the team. Yes, because Dan would also be joining them. We'll call this big guy Conk, and he's also an advanced warrior. He tells Dan they only need to worry about themselves. The time had come, so they headed out immediately to the hunting zone. Peter thought about how these people don't waste any time. Here they were, heading through the dangerous forest. The plan is to attract the monster's attention so they get surrounded. That way, it would be easier to eliminate them. Suddenly, the group was attacked, but the protagonist steps out and defends the truck with his sword. Tail foxes were the ones that attacked the truck. The captain tells the boys to get out. This is the place to see what they're made of. This was their recruitment test. Paul and Conk tell the captain that this test is too hard for these rookies. But Terrence replies that despite being talented, they're only intermediate warriors, and he needs to see what they can do in a real battle. Carrying and protecting them is useless. If they can't handle the simplest creatures here, there's no point in taking them somewhere more dangerous. The tail foxes began to attack the boys. Dan shows us a bit of his power. He positions himself in front of the protagonist, creating a massive shield of energy and shooting off like a meteor toward the giant monster. The protagonist thinks Dan is at a high level for someone so small. In fact, he was only slightly below him right now. Dan slammed into the monster, knocking it to the ground. And he also took the opportunity to charge at the creature with all his strength, creating a massive explosion and finally finishing off this D-rank monster. The boy tells Peter that his skill wasn't bad at all. If it weren't for his injury, the tournament test would have been much easier. The protagonist ends up dealing the final blow to the monster, and he obtained 3 stat points to assign. The hunters watch the boys, and Conk says that Dan was practically on par with him. But now the Cap needs to see what the protagonist's strength is like. Paul says that Dan looked up to Peter as a role model, so it's impossible for that boy to be weaker than Dan. It seemed like the boys were done with the hunt, but suddenly they were attacked by 2 monsters. These were troublesome D-rank monsters. Even the captain planned to intervene, but the protagonist steps forward and with his sword delivers a powerful thrust right into the chameleon's eyes. That was more than enough to stop the monsters. The protagonist thinks about how easy it was to wipe out these creatures. He had become much stronger after the expedition. Paul and Conk wonder how an intermediate warrior was able to do such a thing so easily. The captain thinks about all the strengths and potential Peter has to keep increasing his power. Now he understands why the boss, Hallen, had recommended him to be here with them. In fact, the other guys thought the same thing. They had found a gem with a lot of potential. Later on, night finally fell. The captain apologized to the protagonist for underestimating him the way he did. They continued their hunt, and further ahead they encountered huge, powerful monsters. In the end, the boys positioned themselves in this tower. Peter rested, thinking that it was just as he expected from a professional hunting group. By now, he had earned a considerable amount of points from this mission so far. The captain tells the protagonist he can rest, as they hadn't reached the hardest part yet. So they must stay alert for what's ahead. Terrence tells Peter that there are also monsters here with the strength of a rookie war general, which is why things could get even more dangerous. They only came to hunt rookie war monsters, they're extremely expensive, and that helps fund all the mercenary guild's operations. Peter also thinks that since they're so valuable, the more they hunt, the better. But Kong tells him that's impossible. To take down just one, a team like theirs has to fight for a long time, so it's not as easy as it sounds. Peter starts wondering how many of these creatures humanity can actually handle. If a C-rank monster is this difficult for someone at a warlord level, then how many would it take to wipe out all of humanity? Paul was running toward the tower, being chased by a massive number of monsters called snowhounds. They looked like wolves, but they weren't. With so many monsters, this was going to be a tough battle. The captain tells them to stay safe and warns them to be careful not to let the monsters mutate. These beasts could actually rank up if they were exposed to heat. Believe it or not, just touching fire made these creatures grow stronger. It was pretty strange. Now, they had to make sure they finished off every single monster. Dan was defending himself as best he could. The protagonist was helping him out. Peter thought that by taking out all these creatures, he would earn a lot of points. But behind his back, Paul was planning to screw over the protagonist. However, a monster appeared, and Peter managed to take it down. Paul realized the protagonist had an amazing reaction time. If he had tried anything, he would have been taken out already. The captain continued to be amazed by Peter and was truly happy to have him on the team. The number of monsters was finally decreasing, because even though there were many, the team had already killed quite a few, but suddenly, they were bombarded with grenades. The scorching fire from the grenades began to fall on the wolves, and of course, the one behind all of this was that fake, Falco. Things started to get 3 times more dangerous. The monsters began to mutate. Remember that when they mutate, they become 3 times stronger than a normal one. One of them almost hurt Kong, but the protagonist kept him safe. However, this was no longer a hunting mission. It was now a matter of survival. The captain tells them to fall back and try to finish off the other beasts while he takes care of the mutated monster. Not even the captain knew if he could handle this thing. Kong said the captain was fired up and evolving significantly. Maybe he would even increase his power as a warlord right here. That's exactly what would have happened if it weren't for someone, Paul. The traitor stabs the captain in the back and retreats, saying this was all Peter's fault for making an enemy of the Lee family. The monster takes the opportunity to land a massive blow on the captain, and now he's in a truly difficult situation. It turns out Paul was always an undercover spy for Falco, and now Falco was ordering his men to fire at the tower. Kong gets injured, and even though he was still holding back the monster, he knows he can't last much longer. He orders Dan and Peter to take the captain and get out of there, telling them to let him know his debt is settled when he wakes up. However, the protagonist knocks Kong unconscious and takes on the mutated monster himself. Peter orders Dan to take both of them and get as far away as possible. Most of these creatures were rabid, but only one had managed to mutate. Thanks to the points he accumulated, Peter can now fight and hold them back, but he wasn't actually killing them. He was just making sure he didn't get hurt. So, staying there was a waste of time. The protagonist decides to flee the area with the mutated monster right behind him. He can't just outrun the creature, so Peter spends some points to perfect his movement skill. Willow steps. This was finally enough to escape, but it wasn't that simple. Monsters with warlord-level power gain abilities to control lower-rank monsters. So that was another problem. Falco was convinced the protagonist wouldn't survive, so he planned to hide and wait to find his cold body. Dan found himself in a dead end. Kong wakes up, but they had also attracted the attention of many monsters, so Dan did his best to fight off all the beasts. But then, like a bolt of light, the protagonist appeared and easily wiped out the creatures. Kong couldn't believe this was the same kid. Peter thought about how, since becoming an advanced warrior, D-rank monsters only gave him 1 point. He blamed the Lee family and had no intention of forgiving them. Many monsters were charging straight at them. Peter used his attack moves to take them down. One by one, they all began to fall. But from a distance, the mutated creature's scream could be heard. So, the protagonist told the others they needed to climb. The group climbed up, and the monsters weren't able to follow them. Kong told Peter that the mercenaries and the Lee family didn't get along. Apparently, there was even a spy among them. Dan was furious and wanted to crush the Lee family. Kong and Dan told Peter his strength was amazing. They asked if he had been hiding his true power all along. The protagonist made up a weak excuse, since he obviously couldn't tell them the truth. Kong felt a bit down, realizing there was always someone better out there. But Dan was just happy to see the protagonist's power keep growing. The captain's body was starting to evolve, and he was close to increasing his power rank. A long time ago, the captain had stopped growing due to an accident, but Kong was glad to see him finally making progress as a warlord again. Kong told Peter they needed to keep pushing so they could both become war generals soon. The big guy told him the fastest way to gain power was by taking down high-rank monsters. Moving from a warrior to a warlord is similar to when a monster mutates. They had to find that breakthrough through fierce near-death battles. Peter realized his current point limit was 99, and earning more was becoming much harder. Just at dawn, some eagle foxes appeared. Without a word, these humanoid creatures attacked the group. Aerial monsters are much harder to deal with. Dan took a few hits and ended up injured. Peter noticed that these things targeted the wounded people first. Kong knew these beasts were intelligent. It really felt like they were being hunted. Dan suggested running and hiding in a cave, but Kong said that was too dangerous, because they'd eventually be found. They were safer here in a 3-on-3 fight. The protagonist agreed and remembered he had a long-range weapon. As the monsters attacked again, Peter took out 2 of them in an instant, using the simple rope he got from the twins. That's how he managed to get rid of those 2. But the third one was trying to escape. Kong warned him that he had to finish it off before it reached its den. So the protagonist dashed off at full speed to keep the monster from getting away. Peter could see the creature was losing blood, meaning it would have to land eventually. Just as the monster was coming down, the protagonist took his chance and used his weapon to finish it off. It happened to fall right near a cave. Peter wondered if this was the same cave he had seen before. Sure enough, it was the cave the Wolf King tried to enter while fleeing during the expedition. Peter thought about the powerful energy he felt the first time he was here, which was now gone. In fact, he could see a light coming from what looked like an alien artifact. It was an item from this place, granted by that massive mutated tree. It had to be at least C rank, so he had to get his hands on it. Something like that could be extremely valuable. Peter started taking out the creatures guarding the edges of the tree. Now he could finally head inside by using his rope as a zipline. Once he was inside the tree, he realized it was massive as he approached the intense green light. This was the artifact, a powerful C-rank item. The protagonist remembered how much the D-rank artifact had helped him. He couldn't even imagine how valuable a C-rank one would be. It might even be enough to help him become a warlord. Right below him was the leader of the Eagle Foxes. That monster was easily at the warlord level. In fact, it might even be a monster king. If that was the case, the protagonist wouldn't stand a chance against it. However, the king was asleep. Peter just had to deal with the guards. He definitely had a chance of defeating them, especially with his perception skill. It should be possible to steal the artifact without waking the king. Peter increased his sword mastery to be a silent assassin, and with his speed he took out the lookout bugs without making any noise. However, he realized that just being here in this giant mutated tree was helping him increase his stats, and now he was finally close to the core. He used his rope, and with a silent movement, he finally managed to take the valuable object and escape. But moments later, the Fox King woke up. He said he would destroy the invader who took his children. But since he was currently hatching an egg, the hunt for Peter would start in the future. Peter was moving at full speed, but he made a pause to consume the artifact. However, the system told him that he didn't meet the conditions to consume it. Peter didn't know why, but he decided to listen. He didn't want to risk dying or the artifact having no effect. So for now, he had to return to the others. Peter thought that Falco was likely still on the mountain, so he would settle his business once and for all. By now, Peter was at the level of an advanced warrior. On the other hand, Dan and Kong were looking after the captain. Suddenly, a huge pack of monsters found them. The guys started to hold them back, but it was very difficult. They wouldn't last long if it weren't for the fact that Peter managed to return and wiped out a massive number of bugs in an instant. This time, Peter had the strength to take down these mutated monsters. Kong thought that now Peter had the same aura the captain had before he became more powerful. Peter attacked head-on, and like a whirlwind, he tore through all the monsters. Only the big one was left, and they both attacked each other with all their strength. However, the monsters still couldn't surpass him in power. They were even matched in speed, causing an amazing explosion. Dan wondered if Peter was so powerful, then why was he hiding his strength? Kong said it was normal to hide that much power. Being so young, he would have many enemies with that much strength. Peter was forced back by the monster's strength. He realized he couldn't beat them head-on despite the progress he had made, so he managed to capture it with the magic rope. Then he increased his sword skill to finally finish off this powerful beast. The battle was over. Peter was surprised by his own growth. Now, with his current power, unless his enemies were at least novice warlords, they stood no chance against him. Dan congratulated him on becoming so powerful, and they all celebrated the strength the boy had gained. Peter thought about making up an excuse for Kong about his power, but Kong told him he didn't need to explain. Kong believed the president ordered Peter to hide his true strength. While it wasn't a bad excuse, Peter knew that sooner or later they would realize it wasn't entirely true. Now they had to gather all of this. The meat was delicious, and the hides were worth several million. So everyone got to work. A while later, they had managed to collect everything that could be sold. Just then, Dan found a D-rank monster core. Now they were even richer than before. Money was practically raining down. Kong said the best thing to do now was rest and head home. The forest was still full of danger. Dan and Peter agreed that the Lee family had to pay for everything they had done. This was the base where Falco was hiding. The guards arrived after searching for Peter's supposed body, and Paul wondered if they had actually died. The group had finally found the base. Kong told Peter he could do whatever he wanted. Both he and Dan would stay back, looking out for the captain's well-being. Peter lunged forward to begin the ambush. The guards didn't even hear him. In a brief attack, Peter was already getting his first kills, using his speed, swordsmanship, and perception. It was truly as easy as crushing ants. The protagonist stopped for a second. He didn't really care about these ants, he just wanted Falco's head. Of course, no one was going to let him get to Falcon, but Paul was there too. Unlike the others, he has a very advanced sense of perception, and his instincts told him that Peter was on a whole different level. Paul felt like he was facing a warlord rank monster. In an instant, Peter takes out Paul's companions and now comes for the traitor. Although he tries to run, it's impossible to be faster than the protagonist. Even though Paul tries to counter him, it was useless to stand against the protagonist. Peter gives him a chance to flee, saying his punishment would be dealt by the captain. Paul screams at him that this was all his fault and tries to attack him. Even though the protagonist wants to immobilize him without hurting him, Paul forces himself onto the protagonist's sword, getting pierced. Literally, Paul was too ashamed to look the captain in the eye again. They had been colleagues for a long time, and yet he betrayed him. There was no turning back. The last thing Paul asks is for him not to tell his parents that their son died as a traitor. Falco then calls the radio Paul was carrying. This allows the protagonist to realize that Falcon is still very close. They were hiding right there, but they feel a powerful presence and a sense of death that didn't come from the protagonist. So they decide to flee and escape immediately. While they thought it was the protagonist, Peter also felt the massive burst of power. It was the egg the Eagle Fox King was guarding, which had finally hatched. The protagonist knows that what he felt was incredibly powerful. He had to choose between chasing Falco or checking on the others. Peter has no choice but to head back. A few days later, at Paul's parents' house, they were learning about their son's death. The rest of the group had managed to stay safe. The captain was recovering in a special healing capsule, but Alan was furious over what they did to his hunter squad. Although his assistant told him it wasn't the time for war, he had an overwhelming urge to crush Falcon and his entire family. Kong was telling the president about the protagonist's power, and Alan is amazed, knowing that just 5 days ago Peter wasn't nearly this powerful. It seemed they had a top-tier prodigy on their hands, so they needed to treat him better and give him more gifts. He wanted Peter to understand how important he was to the mercenaries. The plan was simple. Once the captain and Peter became strong warlords, the three of them, including Hallen, would easily take down the Lee family and anyone else in their way. A week passed, and here we are with our protagonist. He was channeling his energy, trying to perfect his techniques so he wouldn't waste too much power when using them in combat. However, he wasn't really making much progress. He didn't feel any improvement with traditional training. In fact, even the practice weapons couldn't withstand his power, but his stats weren't far from reaching the limit of a warrior. Suddenly, he catches the amazing scent of meat and runs to see what it was. It was Dan, who was having a great barbecue with the monster meat they found on the expedition. Terrence had finally managed to recover, and he congratulated Peter on his new strength, thanking him for bravely protecting him and the squad. Peter could sense the captain's new power. Right now, the captain is an advanced novice warlord. The cap tells him they should eat for now, and later they'll head to the mall. Plus, the president had a gift for him. A little while later, we're still at the mercenary base, where we see the protagonist and the captain. Terrence was giving him the full reward for everything they got on that mission. Even though the protagonist didn't want it, the cap told him not to be foolish. The mission was almost 100% completed thanks to him, and everyone was alive because of Peter. It's only natural he keeps it all. Not only did he complete the mission, but he kept his comrades safe. Now the protagonist has over 100 million, and he had to think carefully about how to spend it. However, the cap warns Peter to be very careful. Right now, the mercenaries and the Lee family are on the verge of war. If he wants to defeat them, he must focus on becoming a warlord. For better or worse, that was his destiny, eliminating anyone who gets in his way. The cap reminds him that he's the only one left to become a warlord. The Lee family won't wait until then. Soon they'll attack with the intention of wiping the mercenaries off the map. Peter says he can defend himself with his weapons, but the cap disagrees, saying that to face a warlord, he needs weapons with at least rank D monster cores. Now, they were heading to the auction. Terrence says there will be very valuable items at the mall. They're expensive, but that's what the money is for. So, they head over there. However, on the way, they run into some unpleasant characters. The Lee family, the cap is the first to lose his cool. He really wants to crush them. Falco senses that massive power and starts to get scared, but the mall security intervenes, stating they reserve the right to eliminate anyone who tries to attack civilians inside the building. Since this was an agreement between everyone, the mall is not a place for fighting, and Terrence calms down, understanding the situation. The guys continued on their way, and Peter gave Falco a look that promised he wouldn't forget him, but the guy was very confident because of his father's plan. So for now, the situation didn't escalate any further. The guys had arrived at the auction house. They take their seats, and Terrence explains to Peter how to check the options, the prices, the bids, and so on. Basically, everything he needs to know about the auction. The protagonist finds a good sword made from a rank D king core. It looked great, but the starting bid was 50 million. Kong tells Peter that the sword was insane, and the cap adds that he'll need more than 100 million if he wants to buy it. It hurts Peter to spend so much money, but he's going to sell his rank D cores to get a bit more so he can buy the sword. In the end, the sword was sold to the protagonist for 110 million, and he felt like he was going to faint after spending so much on a single weapon. Everyone congratulated the boy on the incredible purchase, but spending that much money gave him a literal pain in his chest. Now, it was time for the delivery. When Peter opens the case and grips the sword, he feels a massive stat boost, far beyond anything else. Even though his old sword had 2 attributes, the new one was so powerful and gave him so much agility that it was much better. Kong and Dan comfort Peter about spending so much money, but Peter is hurting because he's always been very careful with his spending, so he doesn't feel good about it. And sitting in the front row was none other than Falco. He's furious because he wants the sword, but he only has 100 million, so he can't keep bidding. Now that Peter has this incredible weapon, Falco knows he has to leave even more powerful, no matter the cost. Next up is a D-rank artifact. Falco was determined to get this item at a low price, and even though Peter knows how good these artifacts are, he doesn't actually have the money for the auction. However, he could still take advantage of the situation. Falco would do anything not to lose that item, so the protagonist took the chance to keep raising the price of the artifact. Falco ends up paying 100 million for it, only to realize that Peter had tricked him. The cap warns Peter to be careful with Falco, as that artifact can significantly increase his level. Peter is calm, even laughing because he made Falco buy a defective artifact. Now, they were auctioning off a very rare skill. Peter couldn't believe it because it was so expensive, but the reason it cost so much was that despite being C rank, it was the technique of an ancient god of war. A man who was a legend on his own, capable of holding back a monster outbreak by himself, meaning thousands of monsters against a single person. Thanks to that movement technique, he was able to survive. Peter looks into it a bit more, but it turns out the technique is incomplete, so it's unclear if the book alone is enough to learn it. So, on pure impulse, our protagonist decided to buy this movement skill. The cap told him he was crazy for spending so much money, but Peter has a good feeling about it. When they hand him the book, the system asks for 45 points from the boy to learn this skill. So, he learns it, and the system tells him that since it's incomplete, it might have flaws and won't always reach its full potential. As they left the mall, the cap asks Peter if he wants to test out his new sword. He suggests a friendly sparring session between the two of them, and they both agree. Even President Hallen was there to watch the duel between his two aces. Cap makes the first show of strength. Honestly, Peter gets into his stance. There's no comparison to having a rookie warlord ready to strike you. However, this was a great way to test his current limits. He tries over and over to break through the cap's defense to land a hit, but the cap defends himself perfectly. Going up against a warlord is a whole different level, but the true potential of this weapon wasn't in its raw strength, so Peter pushes himself to the max. However, the cap was far from being cornered. With one move, he pushes the boy back, breaking his entire attack. The system detects that Peter is in a very difficult battle, so it asks if he wants to activate the C-rank movement skill he just bought. Peter says it's too expensive in terms of points. Plus, Terrence tells him that's enough for now. He congratulates him, saying that while he can't match a warlord yet, no advanced warrior is on his level. So, Peter thanks him for the intense match. Not far from there, the Lee family was gathered. This guy was informing them that everything was almost ready to complete the plan, but something was wrong. It turns out there was an intruder. They catch him, and he fires a shot, but the spy manages to escape. So everyone goes running after the intruder. Coincidentally, Peter was passing by nearby. He was on patrol duty under the mercenaries' orders, and right in the alley where he was walking, he finds this girl who is being surrounded by these strange creatures. However, even though he got rid of the monsters, she was completely exhausted and could barely keep going, and ends up falling into Peter's arms. This was Sandra, and she tells him she's being hunted by the Lee family because she has proof of their crimes, and she was in terrible shape. Peter doesn't really know what's going on, so first he gets rid of the monsters, which were new to him. He'd never seen these creatures before. But more monsters were starting to form a circle to surround them, and from behind Peter, guards from the Lee family appear. But Peter takes them out with total ease. Sandra takes off her mask and marvels at how much strength he's gained in such a short time. Now, he finally recognized her. More guards were arriving, and Peter notes that even though he doesn't like her, the enemy of his enemy is his friend. So Peter takes her to the mercenary base to help her. Outside, the others were assessing the situation. Sandra was carrying a cube. It likely contains very important information, but it won't be easy to get. This cube only opens with a code. It's a military-grade artifact. If they force it open, the data will be destroyed. Not even the president or Hallen recognize the monsters Peter mentioned. Suddenly, an assistant arrives, telling Hallen that the Lee family wants to speak with him. So, he takes the call, wanting to know what this is all about. Falcon claims that mercenaries infiltrated his home. He wants the spy returned so she can be brought to justice. Hallen tells him he has no proof, but Falcon threatens him for breaking their agreement and disrespecting the mercenaries if he doesn't comply. So Hallen shouts back, listing everything the Lee family has done to them in the past. If they want war, then they'll have it. The call ends, but Hallen was so impulsive that he inadvertently showed he didn't have the spy's data yet. At least that's what Falcon deduces. He tells a man we'll call the Stain that thanks to the attack he landed on Sandra, the girl won't wake up for at least 3 days, so the information is safe for now. However, he's curious about Peter's involvement and laughs at the misfortune of Sergeant Jack's family. Not far from there, an announcement was made. The Lee family was offering $10 billion to anyone who could eliminate Peter. $10 billion was the reward for his head. The whole city heard the news. The military finds out too, and Connor orders the base to be locked down. He had something important to protect there, while Sean just hopes Peter makes it out alive. Hallen was furious about all of this. He also gets a call from the National Mercenary High Command. Most of them order Hallen not to get involved, but he didn't want to just sit still. Then more news arrived. Peter was gone. He was worried about causing internal conflict within the association, so he decided to distance himself. Hallen ordered the best medical staff to focus on waking Sandra up. He also told his elite forces to be ready for battle at a moment's notice. Meanwhile, Peter was moving across the city's rooftops. He was convinced that leaving the Mercenary Association for now was the right move. However, many assassins were already hunting him for the bounty, and Peter, with relative ease, took them all out in an instant. He warns them that if they don't want to die, their best bet is to run away. Suddenly, Peter is cornered by a group. They thought he was just a rookie warrior, which gave them hope they could catch him. But since they made their choice, he wipes them out in seconds. This earns Peter more points, and he continues on his way. Falcon hears that no one can stop the kid, but he already has a couple of high-level warriors nearby, warlord-class fighters who will help him eliminate Peter once and for all. Back with Peter, he kept taking down assassins, realizing that warriors from almost every organization were now after him. The good thing was that his recovery rate was very high, and he wasn't wearing himself out for now. Suddenly, he is attacked at high speed by this technique, but he dodges the attacks without any trouble. He immediately realizes that they are pseudo-warriors. This means they're below warlords but above advanced warriors, just like him. Falco and his assassins were already here. These two are Falco's trump card, so the attack begins immediately. Peter manages to defend himself, but it's tough because they're strong warriors. He's forced to pull back. He knew that facing these pseudo-warriors wouldn't be easy. The men are also surprised as they attack to kill, but Peter resists.